Okay, thank you to Hadi and the previous panel members there. I think you slipped into our session a bit. It was supposed to be demand-side management, and you started talking about the future and new technologies. But anyway, we'll try not to duplicate those discussions. So this is the final panel session. I believe we've got a presentation following this. Just some quick introductions. Firstly, myself. I lead the Evershed's energy and infrastructure practice in the Middle East. I spent more than 7 years based in Egypt and continue to go back there regularly. It's a place very close to my heart and always enjoy speaking about it. To my left is Paolo Marino, who's a director with Pori, a well-known consulting firm specializing in the energy sector. And correct me if I'm wrong, Paolo, you're currently looking at 3 plant evaluations in Egypt at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. We're currently doing some modeling of the Egyptian market and make the evaluation of several plants on a merchant basis just to see long-term perspectives of the Egyptian market.
Next to Paolo is Wael, who is the Vice President and CEO of Enera Systems, which is a well-known leading EPC and O&M company in Egypt with a focus on renewable energy. Wael's been working in the sector for nearly 30 years, one of the pioneers in the PV. And then, last but not least, we have Magid. Magid is a director with ARCRE, which is a leading independent organization aimed at encouraging uptake of renewable energy and greater efficiency through the Arab world. So you'll have picked up that we're a little light on developer representation. So that being the case, I'd like to start with our developer representative, Wael. Wael, obviously, you know, you've been at the market from the very start when there wasn't one. You've obviously witnessed the recent changes, but what do you see the current challenges and the market going forward into the future? What's your perspective on that?
Thank you, Tim. I've been in discussion for the last 2 days with, of course, with you and with some of the people about the challenges we're facing in Egypt, and I see that we have gone a very long way. We've done a lot since we started in 1990. This is my first system I installed in 1990. That means 26 years ago. We tried along the years to have a feed-in tariff, but
You're welcome.
At the end, last year, we had a feed-in tariff, which is a very good step ahead into the renewable energy field. As we all know, development and new projects require new energy, and I think that renewable is not a luxury anymore. It's a must that we have to go. We have high demand of energy that is approximately between 7 to 8% yearly, which would require a lot of investment into the renewable, the energy sector. What we have seen in the last 1 year is a very good step, but I think if we would like to have a future, we need major steps to happen. Number one, we have a feed-in tariff in place, but it requires some changes. We need a proper vision for the energy sector in Egypt. And last but not least is we need the obstacle and the regulations of the whole system to be adapted to the free market. Number one, regarding the feed-in tariff, as we all know, I don't have to repeat what has been said all the time, but we have a feed-in tariff that is some way it's upside down, where you have the high system, the utility system has higher feed-in tariff than the small systems. And I think, and many of the specialists think the same, that in order to have more quick transaction in the market, we need to have smaller system, which is should generate a quicker pass into the feed-in tariff. Second issue is the regulations. We still have problems with how would I say it? It's the competition between the private sector and the public sector. And this is a problem. The feed-in tariff was especially or designed strategically in order for the private sector to invest into the energy sector. Yet we see some of the facts, and many of them now, that incident that happened, that the government by its companies are competing with the private sector. What I think we should do is that the government should more concentrate and invest into transmission line, into investing into going to a smart grid, into putting more regulations and code into the system, into the renewable or the feed-in tariff system. If we solve these issues, I think we can go forward. I think we have a chance by October, inshallah, to review our feed-in tariff structure. I hope that it will be possible to increase the residential or the small scale up to the 500, and if there is a problem, you can reduce the utility feed-in tariff, but I think it would be much more feasible if we try to increase the small scale capacity.
When we were discussing this earlier, you made the point as well that 50% of consumption is with those residential consumers.
Yes. Yeah, it's. I saw it this way. It's. I think the government, when they thought we have a shortage in electricity, they thought that it can be solved only by bringing in a large capacity, and usual mathematics say 5 by 1,000 equal 1,000 by 5. If we can install smaller system, smaller system, can be more applicable than installing big systems with a smaller number. The government is also saying that 50%, which is true, by the way, the consumption of energy is going by residential, which is true 100%. And the residential is the problem. So we could have solved this issue by changing the residential consumption from a problem to a solution by invest more into the feed-in tariff, the program of the feed-in tariff, which is, if we have higher incentives, it would bring him to invest more. We could have, in my opinion, that we could have finished more than the 2,000 within 2 years without going through the PPA, the leasing of the land, 2,300 megawatt. If we are installing between 20 to 30, that means 100,000 roofs. And if you look at Egypt, this is about 3,000 roofs per governorate, which is a very small amount of houses. In Cairo only, the houses, we have more than, I think, 1.5 million house, not apartment, houses in Cairo, outside Cairo. So we could have solved the problem easily.
Yeah, and I guess from a financing perspective, as we saw with the Suez Canal bond, there's plenty of money out there in society, and that would obviously be another good use for it that
Yes,
takes the financing pressure off
if the
those.
incentives were high enough, like the Suez Canal, I think the people would have invested. And if we have a good PR or a marketing campaign doing this, people would invest into the renewable. Plus, it's a service for the country. He's doing a generation part to the Egyptian economy. He's making money. Plus, he's saving the government the subsidy, of course, that is being paid to the energy sector.
Yeah, and Maged, obviously, you look at this from a pan-Arab perspective. You had some interesting comments. I guess aligning yourself with what Wales said, but also looking at specifications and standards and so forth. Would you like to comment on that?
Okay, I'd like to get back to some of the points that Engineer Wael has reflected on. From the pan-Arab perspective, we are annually reviewing the progress all over the Arab region. And what we are seeing now in Egypt, in fact, is a leapfrog. It's a nice step for the future, in fact. If you look 2 or 3 years ago, the situation was not that promising. However, now we have a political commitment as clear, and we have some steps. These steps can be improved, yes. But the missing components can be added. So what we are discussing now is somehow for improving the entire situation rather than to criticize the ongoing actions. This is the first point to clarify. The second thing that, as explained in the previous session, there are many untapped opportunities. And these untapped opportunities are existing in different sectors. For example, we are speaking about the agricultural sector, the farming, the solar pumping, and so on. And knowing that alone, that we have in Egypt around right now 300,000 diesel pumps, consuming around 2 gigawatts, 2,000 megawatts. So we understand there is a huge potential for distributed generation, not only on rooftop, but in other areas. So this is a new sector that we need to go. And having now the political commitment through the 1.5 million Feedin that is going to be reclaimed in the near future, this is also a very promising opportunity for, I would say, local SMEs and small-scale photovoltaic sector to engage in this business. So this is another track that, in fact, should be integrated in the upcoming plans and it is somehow getting the shape, but not well formulated in the announced target. So as RCRE, we are cooperating with NREA, with Dr. Sobki and Dr. Mohammed Al-Khayat and their teams now in designing the National Renewable Energy Action Plan for Egypt, which should include not only the utility large-scale projects, but for the first time, after 30 years of operation, and Dr. Sobki is celebrating this year 30 years of NREA operation, for the first time would have a dedicated section looking forward for the distributed generation options for tourism areas. You have plenty of areas that are isolated, like Marsa Alam. We have counted around 30 resorts with 20,000 rooms that are serviced mainly by diesel gensets. And these are also another opportunity. This is a new niche market that can be served. Even the utility companies, the DESCOs, distribution companies in Egypt, they have 29 affiliated, isolated power stations, I would say small power stations serving isolated communities. And this from the governmental side can also lead by example, and this is started by SIWA and the other projects that is led by Egypt and Masdar here, so a fruitful cooperation. So what I'm saying that we have, although what is on the surface is always the Feedin Tariff, but there are also other tracks that are going and we should continue working on and include them in our targets and announcement. This is one thing. The concept that is nicely explained by Engineer Wael is turning from the consumer behavior on the community level to the prosumer, producer and consumer at the same time. And in fact, this would require some structural changes in the the behavior of the utilities themselves. They need to go further in the smart grid solution to be able to deal with the issues of having large-scale deployments. And this is also starting now. Although not at the base that we are looking for, but it should go further, and we need, in fact, to plan for this. And I'm quoting Churchill here. Churchill says that if we fail to plan, we are planning to fail. And we should not fail, in fact, in planning for the track that is parallel to the utility scale project, to the large scale projects. But we need also to go for small scale distributed generation. We need to tap into the industrial sector, and not only on the grid, on solar electricity through PV, but also through thermal processes. And we have the solar thermal industry. In fact, they have a high local manufacturing capabilities rather than compared to the photovoltaic. With due respect to the photovoltaic industry, but we need to tap into this, especially with the expected increase in prices of fuel in the near future. Right now, the prices already on the high segment of the consumers are already attractive and feasible for photovoltaic investments. And adding to that, if you are talking about isolated area that you have a logistical problem on transportation of fuel and so on, so the entire solution is really good. The issue that you are referring to is the issue related to the quality of the products. And unfortunately, 30 years ago, we had experience, 20 years, for about 10 years, we have experienced it in the 90s. What was, I would describe as a market failure for solar thermal industry in Egypt. And this was mainly because of the low quality of products in the Egyptian market. And this is why we, as RCRE, initiated in collaboration with the League of Arab States and the Arab Organization for Standardization, we initiated what is called Shamsi certificate, Shamsi mark for quality. And this is a regional mark to ensure the quality of the product and also of the producer, the production line. And last month, we started to explore, would this be applicable to the photovoltaic industry? Yes, there are standards on the module size, but overall system and the performance of the system, the standards are not that comprehensive. There is no similars, like the solar key mark in Europe, we don't have a similar certificate, but there are some programs. And we are trying to get inspired by these programs and tailor together on the regional level with the League of Arab States and other regional actors, and GIZ, in fact, through a project called Reactivate. We are trying to shape a regional program that would help to improve the quality, not only on the components level, but overall on the overall plant level, on the system level, so that we ensure that it would perform over the lifetime as expected. And this would not, so that we are ensuring that not to lose the trust of the consumer or the utility that is, in fact, renting or buying the electricity from the private producer. These are some of the ideas that I want to shed light on. However, the other aspect is when we are talking about renewable energy, I would quote Dr. Sobki yesterday. He asked how many of the attendees here are not from the energy domain. How many are from the parliamentary side, from the parliament, or how many from the, I would say, other cultural sectors of the society? And in fact, none raised their hands yesterday in a session on socioeconomic aspect. It was organized with ARENA and Reactivate project. And we need, in fact, to build a national consensus on the priorities and to think of the energy domain in general, the energy aspects in general, solar thermal, wind, photovoltaic, biomass, biogas, pumped storage, as a portfolio of things that can help Egypt to, in fact, improve the entire, not only the energy sector situation, but also the overall economy of Egypt. And similarly, we can have our own figures that we can promote and our own messages that we can develop. One of the misperceptions that is commonly there in the discussion that we are having with different politicians and decision makers, that who will bear the extra cost of these systems. And we are showing, when we are showing them that by numbers, that some of the technologies, especially photovoltaic and wind, are no longer in need of such discussion, that we are competitive directly without any subsidy, they don't believe us. And somehow they are conservative in delivering the messages. So we need to, in fact, engage with this sort of different segment of community. And for the future, we need to make them our ambassadors of, to speak on behalf of the renewable energy players in Egypt. Another last remark that energy efficiency should be coupled with renewable energy in all the planning actions we are taking. And in fact, we cannot decouple right now between renewable energy and energy efficiency. And given the situation of having lower fuel prices and phasing out of subsidy, we need to think about energy efficiency in a different perspective, and renewable energy would have a different role in the future energy mix. And we need to plan for this, not to wait and see what will happen. So again, we need to focus on our future, how we would like to be in the near future. We have to build, I would say, maximum 5 years action plan, an action plan, not a strategy. In fact, for me, I'm fed up with strategies. I have been hearing strategies and designing strategies for the last 20 years. We need an action plan. This action plan with clear mandates for different agencies. This action plan should have specific funding sources identified, at least so that we can work with clear timelines, so that so the investors and IBBs clearly know what are the projects, what type, and when they are coming, and what are the organization. And we have been drawing what we call a visual tool for investors to see the roadmap, how they will go into the business. And we find that we have 11 phases to get the project running, starting from application to be qualified till you have the commissioning. And in each of these phases, you have 5 to 10 steps. And unless we think about somehow a one-stop shop in the future, somehow it might get complicated. It's complicated. This is one of the reasons that we have some sort of delays right now. We are learning by doing, and now we have built some experiences that the future BBAs and the future contractual obligations are ready now. So the next phases should be faster. However, I would highly recommend that NREA, besides its excellent work that is being done right now, to get the role of the one-stop shop, to get the role also of combining energy efficiency with renewable energy, so that the investors and EPC contractors and developers like Mr. Wael would find them really supportive for their activities and resort to them whenever they would like to promote their work.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously we're currently in a development phase following the passage of the new electricity law. So we will see, partial transformation of the market. And I guess, one of the things that will be considered is, do you continue to rely on heavyweight contracts that have a degree of negotiation, or move to a point where it's more of a regulated environment, use of a code, and really pushing towards a merchant scheme? Paolo, I'd like to turn to you because, in your role, you advise developers, owners, also governments. You've experience of emerging and mature markets. You had some interesting comments about market design, where Egypt is going, might want to go, and experiences in other countries.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Tim, for the question. Looking at this, being in this conference seems a bit to be like going back and looking at the market from a more outside perspective. So I live in Europe, in Italy actually. It seems to be, I go back to some 7-8 years ago, where some similar kind of conferences were held in Europe, and where we thought, and where we were at the beginning of the development of the renewable industry. And then all of a sudden, everything has happened very quickly, fairly quickly. After 5 years, in 5 years, the world has completely changed around us. I remember 2007, 2008, we were still thinking of PV as a nice toy to play with, and now it's in most countries a huge amount of the total installed capacity, and these phenomena tend to happen all of a sudden. So there's a long preparatory phase, and then investment cycles tend to boost pretty quickly. Furthermore, here in Egypt, we're in a situation where due to the decreasing cost of technology, and we've seen in these days, we've discussed the figures of the tenders in Egypt that are very low. Given the expected removal of subsidies to fossil fuels, even though now there's all this uncertainty about the future of commodity prices, namely oil, and as a consequence also natural gas. But nonetheless, when we do our projections of prices under assuming a merchant environment in Egypt, it's clear that the grid parity of renewables is almost there or will be there fairly soon. As a consequence, as soon as grid parity is there and renewable sources are totally competitive with thermal technologies, a potential boost in investment is there. So in order to, what happened? Well, in Europe, we have not been prepared to that revolution, to seeing renewables passing from, or solar PV and wind passing from 2% to 10, 15, 20%, or 30% in some countries of installed capacity. And what I see as necessarily to go along with this revolution and this wave of investment is the need to, when you get there to a world where there is a lot of renewables, to have set up proper market prices and price signals. Because a development which is totally based on long-term PPIs might lock in investments and costs for a very long term. So one of the great challenges that I see, I would say on both shores of the Mediterranean Sea, even though from different perspectives. In Europe, we are trying to adapt spot markets that we have been starting with to renewables. On the southern shore of the Mediterranean, probably it's the other way around, adapting long-term PPIs and starting from long-term PPIs to short-term markets, because otherwise the absence of price signals could cause serious damages in the long run and a difficulty to discriminate between investments. And this is not only for energy, but also for all those services like ancillary services, response, frequency response, reserves, that can be provided either by renewables or new technologies like storage or from traditional thermal technologies, and that will have to be selected on a competitive basis in order to avoid over-investments in certain technologies and an overburden over consumers.
Thanks, Paolo. We're getting a little short on time, so there's a couple of questions that have come through on the iPad, and if anyone else would like to send those through, please feel free, or stick your hand in the air if you would like to take the traditional approach. Well, quick question here. Which governmental entities are competing with the private sector? It said in the Feedin Tariff scheme, but I'm not sure that's necessarily the point you were making. Perhaps you can expand on your earlier comment.
Okay. The government has two programs. One is the Feedin Tariff, and another one is regarding the 1,000 roofs that are being financed by the government. Most of the construction now of the projects are coming into the project which is financed by Shamsik Ya Masr. I don't know the name in English. It's financed by the cabinet, and the money is coming. I think it's a fund or something like this. So in most of these tenders, we are being faced with a government entities competition, plus mainly the big projects are being given as direct orders to these entities. we have some examples, and I can give examples, but let's say in Sharm el-Sheikh, most of the street lighting are giving without a tender. Okay, this is very clear and everyone knows it. But this is not in the feed-in tariff. The feed-in tariff is divided into two segments, the 300 into the small, below the 500 kilowatt, and the other one is on the utility phase. We were talking about, in general, that the feed-in tariff plus the advantage or the progress required for the renewable energy programs in Egypt was initially set to encourage the private sector to go into this field.
We've got another question here, which is, what is the cost per kilowatt hour for developing solar in Egypt, and what is the type of technology they are going for? Now, I'm not sure by cost whether the question is on tariff, or I don't know whether the person is in the room and would like to expand on that. I guess
it starts from 84.6 Egyptian pound up to 102 or $14.3 $14 cents per kilowatt hour on the large scale, and the small one is 84.6 Egyptian piastres per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, so I think in Wales,
which is very low, by the way. This is less than $9 cent per kilowatt hour.
Yes, and I guess your point is that you generally expect the utility scale to be lower, just purely from economies of scale. But
the cost of utility scale should be lower than installing a 10 kilowatt system over a house.
Yeah,
it's much lower. Okay.
But I guess clearly, if you want capacity quick, that's the way to do it.
The feed-in tariff is on the highest. By the way, this was, if we're talking about, and we have discussed this before we go into the session, but if we would like to have a local content, we will never be able to get a local content while we are doing big utility plans. My perspective to this, that most of the utilities, because we are still on level 1 of learning, most of the utility plant will be done by foreigners, not Egyptians, of course. And the big players bring their own global accounts. So they bring their modules, they bring their structure, inverters, everything. They bring their engineering, they bring their marketing, they bring their finance, everything is coming from outside. So there's no chance for a local company to do manufacturing. Yet some of the local content are being done now, but how much are we talking about? Talking about an assembly line that is doing 10 megawatt here. How can he compete? I was myself doing assembling solar modules 15 years ago. Our prices were not much higher than the Chinese, were much higher than the German product. We're talking about mass economy of scale. I'm doing 10 megawatt. The smallest one in Europe is doing 100 megawatt. So you cannot have a local content while you are concentrating on the utility scale systems.
Okay, I guess not unless it's mandated, which could well be something.
But we got a promise
considered in the future.
We got a promise that there will be an increase in the feed-in tariff for the residential and the ones below the 500 kilowatt.
Okay, hopefully. Good. Is that on record now? Right, I've got a red sign telling me time is up, but I'd like to quickly see if there are any other questions from the audience. Anyone prepared to actually put their hand up rather than send anonymous messages? No? Okay, well, to round up then, this is a forward-looking panel. I'd like to ask each of you how you see the market in Egypt in 2030. Paolo.
In terms of energy mix, it's likely to be very much dominated by renewables. And this is my view. Very much dominated by renewables, possibly complemented by certainly new technologies like storage. We have seen already, in some countries, we see already some commercially viable schemes for storage based on availability and capacity payments. So that's likely to happen with a proper regulatory framework here as well. And certainly still by some probably swinging gas consumption. This is more or less the way I see it in Egypt in 2030.
Okay, well.
I think we will need by 2025 approximately 75 to 80 gigawatt. If we go by the plans of the government, I think will be a shortage of 20%. So we need to start now. We need to have a new feed-in tariff. We need to have a real vision with a real plan that put the energy mix where it is needed, where we should put resources we have, while we should not use the energy mix concept as an excuse to add resources that we don't have, like coal. And we should have a definite regulations if we would like to have the private sector investing into this market. If we don't, it's okay. It has been there for the last 60 years. The government is doing everything, so they can do everything like in the past. So, but things has to be clear if we would like to go any further.
Magid?
Well, I see a bright future for Egypt. By 2030, I see a liberalized market where we have the prosumer concepts, as I explained earlier, where we have, in fact, somehow gradually reached a point where we have decoupled the economic growth from the energy growth, so that we are not suffering from a crisis in energy, but in fact exporting electricity to our neighbor country, where we have interconnections not only to the Arab region, Saudi Arabia, Libya, and so on, but we have the interconnections to Africa downward and to Europe, and Egypt really as a hub of this trade all over the Mediterranean region between Europe, Asia, and Europe. This is a future that can be really achieved within these 15 years. Egypt would be, in fact, I see a different Egypt from what we are seeing now, a modernized one, smart one, everywhere, relying on smart technologies, relying on energy efficiency, smart homes, smart appliances, high specification everywhere, quality assurance everywhere, successful developers that are investing in all Africa and all Asia. So this is the future of Egypt that I would see the energy sector by 2030.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly very optimistic as well. I'd like to thank you all for your thoughts, and if the audience could show their appreciation, that would be most grateful.